We've all seen the hatred towards Rolex in recent years, to the point where longtime Rolex fanboys and girls are even turning their backs on the brand. Is this a Rolex hate train that everyone seems to be jumping on without really understanding the reasons behind their emotions? It's no news that Rolexes have become the scarcest commodity in the luxury watch world right now, and many Rolex buyers have grown tired and frustrated with the politics and hassle that goes into collecting any of the brand's exquisite timepieces. With the persistent increases in Rolex prices and the growing complexities of collecting a unit of the timepiece by many of its fans, it appears the hate for the brand and pretty much everyone and everything associated with it has finally hit the roof. But despite all the perceived hate that the brand has seemingly received in recent years, Rolex remains envied as the choice brand for many watch collectors and lovers globally. This rather ironic situation is leaving watch enthusiasts probing what exactly the genesis of this perceived hate for Rolexes could be, and just how serious of a situation it is. Well, hang on as we explore the love-hate situation that has come to be peculiar with the Rolex brand the world over. Watch lovers and collectors are increasingly coming to accept the fact that there's a growing atmosphere of dislike or even outright hatred for Rolex and anything or anyone associated with the brand. If you've ever come across anyone who falls in this category of supposed Rolex haters, the reasons for their resentment to the brand would often range from the absurdly expensive prices of the brand's timepieces to claims that owning a Rolex has become a cliché and is no more than a sign of proving their status symbol. You might even hear quite a lot of such people asserting that they'll never buy a Rolex as the brand's watches are simply not worth the fuss of being on a wait list or the ill treatment from Rolex ADs. But then, you might likewise come across people who openly admit their resentment for the brand, but would still love to have one no matter the cost if only they could. But what exactly is the role of Rolex as a brand? Its authorized dealerships, private collectors, flippers, and even the gray market in this increasingly obvious hatred towards Rolex and its timepieces. What's the Rolex brand doing to curtail this trend? Is Rolex profiting from this growing toxicity towards its brand? How bad exactly has this situation become? And is it ever possible to return to a time when Rolexes were widely the favorite timepieces for pretty much everyone? Another interesting question to ask is if the extremely rich have an unfair advantage in the Rolex collection and are cheating their way into owning some of the most exquisite Rolex timepieces. Well, pro-Rolexers who neither own a Rolex nor even plan to own one in the future, in most cases, would often argue that there should be no problem in paying whatever price it is for a Rolex, as long as it's affordable to the buyer. So it's alright to spend $20,000 on a Rolex or even more. And they'd also argue that this is much better than buying a car every 2 to 3 years for the same amount, when you'd still need to pay for other stuff like annual servicing, tax, MOT, insurance, and a bunch of other things just to be able to use the car, which will be worth only a third of its value in another 3 to 4 years. The crux of their argument then comes to the fact that if people don't make a fuss out of this or make bad comments about it and generally see it as being just a way of life, why then should getting a Rolex that'll appreciate over the same period be the bone of contention and a cause for widespread hatred? One interesting twist to this whole argument, as it's already been mentioned earlier, is that the bulk of the people who claim that they hate Rolex don't hate the brand. What they rather seem to hate is all of the politics that goes into actually buying a Rolex as things stand. They hate the seemingly overbearing difficulty of getting a Rolex at any of the brand's authorized dealerships, the rather dirty and unbecoming games that many Rolex authorized dealers play. They hate the unethical flippers, who very unsurprisingly can get just about any Rolex watch at the dealerships and flip them very smoothly for a quick profit. Then they hate the gray dealers and the gray market, as well as the outrightly absurd prices for which these obviously and illegally sourced Rolexes are being sold for. In some cases, what's paid for a Rolex timepiece in the gray market could get 2 of the same timepiece from an authorized dealer if the process isn't as daunting and complicated as it's being deliberately made to be. Aside from the rich who are rigging their way to getting Rolex watches, whether that's at authorized dealerships or the gray market, many self-acclaimed watch lovers, now Rolex haters, are likewise and mostly pointing their fingers at the brand's authorized dealerships for being the masterminds of this rather unpleasant situation to begin with. In addition to the fact that Rolex timepieces have consistently been in short supply for decades now, Rolex's authorized dealers are likewise making collecting Rolex wristwatches at the regular retail prices and following the designated channels a near impossibility. Collecting items has been an inherent human trait since time immemorial, and as such, has always been present for varying reasons. The situation should ordinarily not be any different for collecting Rolexes, except that in this case, the process can be especially painful thanks to the rather inappropriate role that many Rolex authorized dealers tend to play to thwart and discredit the whole process, as many Rolex haters have vocally criticized. Numerous authorized dealers supposedly have an exclusive list of individuals that they strictly sell to via shady channels. A large portion of their customer base may consist of flippers, who often give them a sizable kickback, as well as the ultra-rich who compensate them via other channels, even when records might show that the watches were purchased at the recommended retail prices. If all these practices are indeed true, making it to the exclusive list of these unprincipled authorized dealers for an ordinary Rolex fanboy or girl will be virtually impossible. To be able to make the exclusive list of people we may call when a watch arrives, many Rolex lovers are cajoled into buying thousands of dollars worth of less popular models of the brand's timepieces by Rolex authorized dealers. And even after agreeing to this, many still get cheated out of new arrivals, as these dealers prefer to sell to flippers for an additional kickback. A multitude of iconic Rolex models, in most cases, solely end up in the hands of collectors that only collect these watches, not because of their love of the craftsmanship or history behind the brand, but because owning a Rolex delivers a certain status symbol and is, more importantly, a viable investment. They simply want a commodity that will go up in value, and because of the difficulty in buying Rolexes and the long waiting lists, the watches sure do go up in value. These watches become an investment tool or a piece of luxury that is to be hoarded and flaunted rather than items to be enjoyed and worn because of the happiness that they customarily elicit for their owners as well as their rich history. The situation becomes even more dire with the long-existing fact that Rolex owns and controls only one of its 1,816 authorized dealerships that exist globally. All of Rolex's other authorized dealerships are independent businesses that are run by individuals who, like Rolex, are in business to maximize gains and operate with very loose regulations and monitoring from the brand. While this rather unusual situation has been largely identified by many outpriced and agitating Rolex collectors as a major cause of the widespread irregularities by dealerships, these dealerships have continued to show no sign of relenting in their irregular conduct. Add this to the situation of artificial scarcity that Rolex as a brand itself creates for its timepieces, then we might have a situation where this supposed hate for Rolexes transcends into a much more complex dilemma for the brand and every other person or entity associated with it. When you have to pay double or triple the listed price for a unit of your choice brand's timepiece, especially due to irregularities of unscrupulous middlemen, then this might just spiral into a deep-seated resentment for the brand and whatever is associated with it over time. And this might just be what's happening with Rolex, especially with the very shady roles of its many authorized dealers. Many supposed Rolex haters have also heaped a substantial amount of blame on the brand itself for creating a situation of persistent artificial scarcity for its timepieces, especially its most iconic models like the Rolex Daytona and the Submariner. While some of these individuals identify with the global pandemic for being the major cause of the continuous shortage in Rolex supply, a situation from which the brand has yet to recover, others have described it as being a deliberate act from Rolex that's been around for much longer than before the pandemic, regarding it as a basic ploy in building more clout around the brand, and further classing their timepieces as being only reserved for those who can afford to pay above retail prices for it on the gray market. This rather appalling situation has left many regular Rolex buyers on endless waiting lists and has seemingly continued to fuel the growing hatred for Rolexes among fans and non-fans alike.